Hello, welcome back to Joan of Arc. Of course, I will say hello to my members first because they always get this first anyway. Sorry about the noise in the background. I have fans running because it's hot and I have the dogs to keep cool as well as myself. Respited only for torture. There is no certainty that anyone in all ruin was in the secret of the deep game with Couchon was playing except the Cardinal of Winchester. Then you can imagine the astonishment and stupefaction of that vast mob gathered there and those crowds of churchmen assembled on the two platforms when they saw Joan of Arc moving away. Alive and whole, slipping out of their grip at last. After all this tedious waiting, all this tantalizing expectancy. Nobody was able to stir or speak for a while. So paralyzing was the universal astonishment. So unbelievable the fact that the stake was actually standing there unoccupied and its prey gone. Then suddenly everybody broke into a fury of rage. Maledictions and charges of treachery began to fly freely. Yes, and even stones. A stone came near killing the Cardinal of Winchester. It just missed his head. But the man who threw it was not to blame, for he was excited, and a person who is excited never can throw straight. The tumult was very great, indeed, for a while. In the midst of the chaplain of the cardinal even forgot the proprietors, so far as to opprobriously assail the august bishop of Beauvais himself, shaking his fist in his face and shouting, "By God, you are a traitor!" "You lie," responded the bishop. He a traitor? Oh, far from it. He certainly was the last Frenchman that any Briton had a right to bring that charge against. The Earl of Warwick lost his temper, too. He was a doughty soldier, but when it came to intellectuals, when it came to delicate chicane and scheming and trickery, he couldn't see any further through a millstone than another. So he burst out in frank warrior fashion and swore that the King of England was being treacherously used, and that Joan of Arc was going to be allowed to cheat the stake. But they whispered comfort in his ear. "Give yourself no uneasiness, my lord. We shall soon have her again." Perhaps the like tidings found their way all round, for good news travels fast as well as bad. Oh, at any rate, the ragings presently quieted down, the huge concourse crumbled apart and disappeared, and thus we reached the noon of that fearful Thursday. We two youths were happy, happier than any words can tell, for we were not in the secret any more than the rest. Joan's life was saved, we knew that, and that was enough. France would hear of this day's infamous work, and then, why, then her gallant sons would flock to her, standing by thousands and thousands, multitudes upon multitudes. Their wrath would be like the wrath of the ocean when the storm winds sweep it. They would hurl themselves against the doomed city and overwhelm it like the resistless tides of that ocean, and Joan of Arc would march again. That's what we thought. In 6 days, 7 days, 1 short week, noble France, grateful France, indignant France would be thundering at these gates. Let us count the hours. Let us count the minutes. Let us count the seconds. Oh, happy days! Days of ecstasy. How our hearts sang in our bosoms. We were young then. Yes, we were very young. Do you think the exhausted prisoner was allowed to rest and sleep after she had spent the small remnant of her strength in dragging her tired body back to that dungeon? No. There was no rest for her, not with those sleuth hounds, right on a track. Couchon and some of his people followed her to a lair straight away. They found her dazed and dull, her mental and physical forces in a state of prostration. They told her she had been abjured, that she had made certain promises among them to resume the apparel of her sex, and that if she relapsed the church would cast her out for good and all. She heard the words, but they had no meaning to her. She was like a person who has taken a narcotic and is dying for sleep, dying for rest from nagging, dying to be let alone, and who melancholy does everything the persecutor asks, taking but dull note of things done, and but dully recording them in the memory. And so Joan put on the gown which Couchon and his people had brought, and would come to herself by and by. I've ever first but a dim idea as to when and how the change had come about. Cushan went away happy and content. Joan had resumed woman's dress without protest. Also, she'd been formally warned against relapsing. He had witnesses in these facts. How could matters be any better? But suppose she should not relapse. Why then she must be forced to do it? Did Cushan hint to the English guards that thenceforth, if they chose to make their prisoner's captivity crueler and bitterer than ever, no official notice would be taken of it? Perhaps so, since the guards did begin that policy at once, and no official notice was taken of it. Yet from that moment, Joan's life in that dungeon was made almost unendurable. Do not ask me to enlarge upon it. I will not do it. They did very bad things to her in that prison, okay? Very bad things that no one deserves. Friday and Saturday were happy days for Noel and me. Our minds were full of our splendid dream of France, aroused France. Shaking her mane, France on the march. France at the gate, Rouen in ashes, and Joan free. Our imagination was on fire. We were delirious with pride and joy, for we were very young, as I have said. We knew nothing about what had been happening in the dungeon in the yester afternoon. We supposed that, as Joan had abjured and been taken back into the forgiving bosom of the church, she was being gently used now, and her captivity made it pleasant and comfortable for her as the circumstances would allow. So in our contentment we planned out our share in the great rescue and fought our part of the fight, over and over again during those 2 happy days, as happy days ever I have known. Sunday morning came. I was awake, enjoying the balmy, lazy weather and thinking of the rescue, what else? I had no other thought now. I was absorbed in that, drunk with the happiness of it. I heard a voice shouting far down the street, and it soon came nearer, and I caught the words, "Joan of Arc has relapsed. The witch's time has come." It stopped my heart. It turned my blood to ice. That was more than 60 years ago. But that triumphant note rings as clear in my memory today as it rang in my ear that long vanished summer morning. We are so strangely made. The memories that could make us happy pass away. It is the memories that break our hearts that abide. Soon the voices took up the cry, 10 scores, hundreds of voices. All the world seemed filled with the brutal joy of it. And then were other clamours, the chatter of rushing feet, merry congratulations, bursts of coarse laughter, the rolling of drums, the boom and crash of distant bands, profaning the sacred day with the music of victory and thanksgiving. About the middle of afternoon came a summons from Manchon, and me to go to Joan's dungeon, a summons from Cushan. But by that time distrust had already taken possession of the English and their soldiery again, and all Rouen was in an angry and threatening mood. We could see plenty of evidences of this from our own windows, fish shaking, black looks, tumultuous tides of furious men billowing by along the street. We learned that up at the castle things were going very badly, indeed. That there was a great mob gathered there, who considered the relapse a lie and the priest a trick, and among them many half-drunk English soldiers. Moreover, these people had gone beyond words. They had laid hands upon a member of churchmen who were trying to enter the castle, and it had been difficult work to rescue them and save their lives. So Manchon refused to go. He said he would not go a step without a safeguard from Warwick. So next morning Warwick sent an escort of soldiers, then we went. Matters had not grown peaceful meantime, but worse. The soldiers protected us from bodily damage, but as we passed through the gate, great mobs at the castle were assailed with insults and shameful epithets. I bore it well enough, though, and said to myself with secret satisfaction, "In 3 or 4 short days, my lads, you'll be employing your tongues in the different sort from this, and I shall be there to hear." To my own mind, these were as good as dead men. How many of them would still be alive after the rescue that was coming? Not more than enough to amuse the executioner a short half-hour, certainly. It turned out that the report was true. Jonah relapsed. She was sitting in her chains, closed again in male attire. She accused nobody. That was simply her way. It was not in her character to hold a servant to account for what his master had made him do. And her mind had cleared now, and she knew that the advantage which had been taken of her the previous morning had its origin, not in the subordinate, but in the master Cushan. Here is what had happened. While Joan slept in the early morning of Sunday, one of the guards stole her female apparel and put her male attire in its place. When she woke, she asked for the other dress, but the guards refused to give it back. She protested and she was forbidden to wear a male dress, but they continued to refuse. She had to have clothing, for modesty's sake. Moreover, she saw that she could not save her life if she must fight for it against treacheries like this. So she put on the forbidden garments, knowing what the end would be. She was weary of struggle, poor thing. We'd followed in the wake of Cushan, the Vice Inquisitor, through the 6 or 8, and when I saw Joan sitting there, despondent, forlorn, still in chains, when I was expecting to see the situation different, I did not know what to make of it. The shock was very great. I had doubted the relapse, perhaps. Possibly I believed in it, but had not realized it. Kushan's victory was complete. He had an harassed and irritated and disgusted look for a long time, but that was all gone now. Contentment and serenity had taken its place. His purple face was full of tranquil and malicious happiness. He went trailing his robes and stood grandly in front of Joan with his legs apart and remained some more than a minute, gloating over her and enjoying the sight of this poor ruined creature, who had won so lofty a place from the service of the meek and merciful Jesus, Saviour of the world, Lord of the universe, in case England kept her promise to him, who kept no promises himself. Presently the judges began to question Joan. One of them, named Marjorie, who was a man with more insight than prudence, remarked upon Joan's change of clothing and said, "There is something suspicious about this. How could it have come about without connivance on the part of others? Perhaps even something worse." "Thousand devils!" screamed Cushan in a fury. "Will you shut your mouth?" "Ah, maniac! Traitor!" shouted the soldiers on guard, and made a rush for Marjorie, with the lances levelled. It was with the greatest difficulty that he was saved from being run through the body. He made no more attempts to help the inquiry, poor man. The other judges proceeded with the questionings. "Why have you resumed this male habit?" I did not quite catch the answer, for just then a soldier's halberd slipped from his fingers and fell on the stone floor with a crash. But I thought I understood Joan to say that she had resumed it of her own notion. "But you had promised and sworn that you would not go back to it." I was full of anxiety to hear the answer to that question, and when it came, it was just what I was expecting. She said quite quietly, "I have never intended and never understood myself to swear I would not resume it." There I had been sure, all along, that she did not know what she was doing and saying on that platform. Thursday, and this answer of hers was proof that I had not been mistaken. Then she went on to add this, "But I had a right to resume it, because the promises made to me have not been kept, promises that I should be allowed to go to Mass, receive the communion, that I should be freed from the bondage of these chains, but they are still upon me, as you see. Nevertheless, you have abjured, and have especially promised to return no more to the dress of man." Then Joan held out her fettered hands sorrowfully toward the unfeeling men and said, "I would rather die than continue so. But if they may be taken off, and if I may hear Mass, and be removed to a penitential prison, and have a woman about me, I will be good, and will do what shall seem good to you that I do." Cushan sniffed scoffingly at that, honour the compact which his had made with her. Fulfil its conditions. What need of that? Conditions have been good thing to concede, temporarily and for advantage, but they have served their turn, let something of a fresher sort and a more consequence be considered. The resumption of the male dress was sufficient for all practical purposes, but perhaps Joan could be led to add something to that fatal crime. Sir Cushan asked her if her voice had spoken to her since Thursday, and he reminded her of her abjuration. Yes, she answered, and then it came out that the voice that had talked with her about the abjuration told her about it, I suppose. She guilelessly reasserted the heavenly origin of her mission, and did it with the untroubled mien of one who was not conscious that she had ever knowingly repudiated it. So I was convinced, once more, that she had no notion of what she was doing that Thursday morning on that platform. Finally she said, "My voice has told me I did very wrong to confess that what I had done was not well." Then she sighed and said with simplicity, "But it was fear of the fire that made me do so." That is, fear of the fire had made her sign a paper whose contents she had not understood then, but understood now by revelation of her voices and by testimony of the prosecutors. She was sane now, and not exhausted. Her courage had come back, and with it her inborn loyalty to the truth. She was bravely and serenely speaking it again, knowing that it would deliver her body up to that very fire which had such terrors for her. The answer of her was quite long, quite frank, wholly free from concealments or palliations. It made me shudder. I knew she was pronouncing sentence of death upon herself. So did poor Manchon. And he wrote in the margin abreast of it, "Responsio mortifera," fatal answer. Yes, all present know that it was indeed a fatal answer. Then there fell a silence, such as falls in sick room when the watchers of the dying draw a deep breath and say softly, one to another, "All is over." Here likewise all was over, but after some moments Cushan, wishing to clinch this matter and make it final, put the question, "Do you still believe that your voices are Saint Marguerite and Saint Catherine?" "Yes, and that they come from God." "Yet you denied them on the scaffold." Then she made direct and clear affirmation that she had never had any intention to deny them, and that if, I noted the if she had made some retractions and revocations on the scaffold, it was from fear of the fire, and it was a violation of the truth. There it is again, you see. She certainly never knew what it was she had done on the scaffold until she was told of it afterward, by the people and the voices. And now she closed this most painful scene with these words, and there was a weary note in them that was pathetic. "I would rather do my penance all at once. Let me die. I cannot endure captivity any longer." The spirit born for sunshine and liberty so longed for release, that it would take it in any form, even that. Several among the company of judges went from the place troubled and sorrowful, the others in another mood. In the court of the castle we found the Earl of Warwick, 50 English waiting impatient for news. As soon as Cushan saw them, he shouted, laughing, "Think of a man destroying a friendless poor girl, and then having the heart to laugh at it. Make yourself comfortable. It's all over with her." Oh my God. And that's basically what they did to Joan of Arc. As you can see, they totally betrayed her, and they really did do some really horrible things to her in that prison, by the way. As you can imagine, they're all male, she's female. Put two and two together, yeah. She was tortured every single day when they promised her that she would be put in the presence of females, but they just put her back in the same dungeon with the same cruel males. So, there you go. Thank you for listening, and many blessings.